The neighbor woman cracked open her door and looked at the golden-haired child sheltering outside, her heart aching with pity, and softly called her, "Dear." She apologized awkwardly, as if she couldn't stop feeling guilty about letting a small child hide away in such a situation. The golden-haired girl calmly tucked herself into the cramped corner, while the woman kept apologizing for making her hide in such a shabby place. Diana looked up, her blue eyes still bright despite being smudged with dirt, and gently reassured her that everything was fine and she shouldn't worry so much. The woman quickly said the spot was too dusty and urged Diana to sit down so her throat wouldn't hurt, but the girl politely declined and even reminded her to put her own safety first. Hearing such a young child speak so maturely, the woman closed the door in confusion, wondering who on earth had taught a child to talk like that. Before she could even catch her breath, she jumped again when she saw Diana still standing quietly on the other side, her serious gaze enough to unsettle an adult. Outside, a man shouted loudly, asking whether the owner of this house was home. Standing in the rain with an overbearing air, he demanded to know if a golden-haired girl around 5 or 6 years old was inside. Hearing this, Diana instantly went silent, her face tightening, clearly aware that danger was closing in. She gripped the broom handle in her hand tightly, her instincts telling her to prepare to defend herself if things turned bad. The girl being hunted was a 5-year-old with golden hair, who should have been spending her days learning piano and etiquette like any other young lady. But instead of a peaceful childhood, Diana was forced to flee through the storm, wondering why on earth this was happening to her. In her memories of her past life, she had been a special forces soldier in the Korean military, and the last thing she ever saw was a cold blue sky. Her torn parachute swayed wildly through the air, marking the life-or-death moment she could never forget. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer on the familiar battlefield, but had fallen into an entirely different fate. A hand took hold of hers, and a voice called her Diana, asking if she understood. The person told her this was Duke Arx and said Diana only had to follow him, because her mother had told her to. The names Duke Arx and Irene felt strangely familiar to Diana, and she slowly began to realize the truth. She had been reincarnated into a novel she had read before she died. Truly, life never runs short of cruel plot twists. What was worse, she hadn't become the female lead at all, but merely a side character who would be used and then die a miserable death. So Diana understood she had to survive, especially now that she had been thrown into this absurd world while still keeping all her memories from before she died. In the original story, the first person to adopt her should have been the Duke's family, but now it was her maternal uncle, Viccount Norfer, who had come looking for her first. To escape her uncle and change the course of the original story, Diana had to rely on the promise of her neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy, who was now trembling before a man of power. Mrs. Dorothy apologized desperately, insisting her house had no children. Her eldest had already married, and her second child was away at school. True to any parent bragging about their kids no matter the situation, she rattled on about how brilliant her child had been, studying at the capital's academy, smart, talented, and loved by everyone, leaving the man both embarrassed and irritated. The man finally cut her off, saying fine, if there were no children then they'd leave, while Mrs. Dorothy kept up the act even though her heart felt ready to burst. Fortunately, Mrs. Dorothy listened to Diana and didn't let her step outside, though she still worried and asked if she wanted to come out on her own. Seeing Diana stay put, she gently offered to prepare a light snack for her, but the girl immediately refused, thinking the food should be saved for an emergency. Mrs. Dorothy felt both pity and amazement, quietly marveling at how mature this child was. She even joked that Diana spoke just like a soldier, which made the girl flinch, realizing her past life instincts had slipped out unconsciously again. Diana grew confused, wondering how a 5-year-old was supposed to act. Should she cry and beg for food, or whine for toys? But just thinking about it made her feel strange about herself. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning split the sky, shattering the brief calm and dragging everything back into danger. Amid the thunder and rain, a low, commanding voice rang out, asking if the owner of the house was present. The moment she heard that voice, Diana knew instantly who it was. The one who had just arrived was Duke Arx, the very person Diana had to meet if she wanted to escape the death already written for her in the novel. Outside, the Duke's men stopped in the rain, and the voice confirmed that the child was waiting inside. Diana pressed close beside the man, murmuring softly that her mother had asked her to come find him. Looking at the Duke's cold face, Diana recalled her mother's words, that he would surely protect her, and that she had to believe it. The Duke's carriage and soldiers arrived swiftly, making it feel as though this small matter in the little house had been swept up into something far greater. Duke Arx sat inside the carriage, his expression cold yet dignified, causing the air around him to tense automatically. Diana stood before him in a stiff, soldier-like stance, awkward enough to be almost funny, while the Duke looked utterly indifferent. He asked whether she was truly Irene's daughter. Diana answered loudly and clearly, yes, she was Irene's daughter. The Duke asked again whether her mother had truly appeared to her in a dream last night and told her to flee from her uncle. Diana confirmed it at once, adding that her mother had told her to go with the Duke instead. Impressed by how clearly she answered, the Duke remarked that she was very intelligent. Diana bowed her head in thanks while his attendants stood puzzled, unsure who the Duke she kept referring to even was. The Duke calmly told Diana she didn't need to try so hard, even though he himself hadn't fully grasped the situation yet. Just then, the sound of a horse neighing rang out in the rain, signaling that something unusual was happening. The Duke's expression hardened instantly as he demanded to know who dared, while someone outside announced that the owner of this carriage was Duke Arx. Outside, someone shouted for everyone to clear the way, making the tension in the air even sharper. An attendant quickly offered to go check, but the Duke reminded him to sheath his sword first, since there was a child present. The golden-haired girl panicked and cried out that she was completely fine, only begging the Duke not to release any more killing intent. Seeing Diana trembling, the Duke softened his tone and told her she could calm down and step out of the carriage. While Diana was still flustered, the Duke reminded her that he had promised his late wife he would honor her mother's wishes, so for now he wouldn't force her into anything. The Duke carried Diana down from the carriage, saying he would assess the situation himself and come back, telling her not to worry. Though his words were cold, the way he protected her was unmistakable. Diana obediently said yes, while secretly thinking he was kinder than she'd expected, telling herself the Duke was decent enough not to force a child against her own will. The story then introduced Duke Kaizen Arches, ruler of the Frozen North and the strongest warrior of his era, a reputation alone enough to make anyone wary. Yet after losing his wife, the Duke had become nothing more than a silent, hollow man, sunk in gloom. Standing in the rain, the Duke ordered Glenn to clear the road. He needed only a short command to prove his commanding presence hadn't faded at all. Glenn cautiously reported that a rude man was blocking the road ahead and asked how the Duke wanted to handle him. Something about the situation already felt off. The man trembled as he introduced himself, saying it had been a long time since he'd seen the Duke. He was Viscount Norfer. His fawning manner alone made it clear something shady was going on. Hearing the name Norfer, Diana immediately recognized him as her uncle. She recalled in horror that he and Glenn were the ones who had once plotted to harm her. The Duke asked coldly whether the two of them had met before. The Viscount quickly replied that they had met at a royal banquet 7 years ago, then said he was actually searching for someone. The Duke cut him off with a single, "Wait," his voice turning noticeably colder, enough on its own to stretch the air tight as a wire. The Duke asked bluntly whether the Viscount knew exactly who he was and still dared to block his path, and whether the niece he mentioned was simply an excuse to justify such disrespect. Viscount Norfer hastily apologized for his rudeness, but kept insisting his niece had gone missing and that he was desperately searching for her. He claimed he had lost his composure for a moment and begged the Duke's forgiveness. Diana, hearing this, was ready to explode with fury, knowing full well her uncle was only putting on a show to drag her back. Diana remembered how, even while her mother Irene was alive, they had exploited her without ever treating her like real family. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. The Viscount continued to feign heartbreak, begging the Duke to let him check inside the carriage, using concern for his niece as an excuse, polite words masking an all-too-obvious motive. The Duke simply gave a faint smile, which sent the Viscount into a panic. It wasn't a warm smile at all, but one that seemed to announce he had just dug his own grave. The Duke admitted he had perhaps been too lenient for too long, to the point that people now assumed anyone could impose on him however they pleased. The Viscount turned pale with fear, stammering that his niece meant a great deal to him, but against the Duke's overwhelming presence, his excuses grew weaker by the second. The Duke turned to Glenn and calmly said it seemed the Viscount would be heading home now, telling him to see the man off safely. That word safely sounded polite, yet chilling all the same. Diana let out a breath of relief, silently thanking the goddess Luden that she had finally been saved. She believed the first step toward changing her fate had just been completed. Sitting in the carriage, Diana still couldn't quite process how things had turned out. The Duke opening the carriage door and bringing her along like this. To her, everything that had just happened felt utterly absurd. The Duke looked at her and said that this girl, in particular, was destined to become his daughter-in-law. Those words froze every thought in Diana's head. Diana was struck speechless, the words daughter-in-law echoing endlessly in her mind. She never imagined her life could take such a sharp, sudden turn. Diana remembered how adults often joked that children would grow up to be in-laws someday, words meant as playful banter that no one ever truly took seriously. Ordinarily, promises made between parents over coffee or dinner faded away with time, so Diana found it hard to believe the Duke was being serious about this. The Duke assumed Diana was simply too young to understand what daughter-in-law meant. Seeing her bewildered expression, he concluded that of course a child couldn't grasp adult matters. Seeing how flustered Diana looked, the Duke grew even more certain she didn't understand. But in truth, the problem wasn't that Diana didn't know. It was that she understood all too well, which was exactly why she was so shocked. At first, Diana was caught off guard, but once she calmed down, she realized that if she became part of the Duke's family, the Viscount would never again be able to touch her so easily. The Duke told her that everyone in the estate would take good care of her and that she should think of it as her own home. Diana instantly relaxed. She felt no objection in her heart, even though everything had happened so suddenly. Diana reminded herself that she alone had to take hold of her own life and grow strong on her own strength. She never wanted her fate decided by someone else again. The Duke fell silent, looking at Diana, and she stared back at him just as quietly. An awkward stillness settled between them. At last the Duke said he understood, and told Diana to rest for now. The carriage rolled on through the rain, carrying her toward an entirely new place. When Diana arrived, two maids greeted her with excitement, calling her young lady, one bright and cheerful, the other more serious but no less attentive. Diana was dressed in a pretty pink gown, looking so adorable that anyone who saw her would melt. The maids couldn't hide their delight. They praised how beautiful Diana looked and how soft her hair was. Diana sat still and endured it, clearly not yet used to being fussed over like a doll. Diana shyly thanked them for helping her change, and one maid gently told her she could speak casually, without needing formal language toward the servants. Diana understood the logic, but still felt uneasy inside. She wasn't used to acting important in such a grand, luxurious place. Looking around the opulent room, Diana felt even more out of place. Having been a low-level worker in her past life, she truly wasn't used to being pampered like a noble young lady. Diana told herself she would adjust her attitude, while the maids smiled and said she could simply call them Lily and Mia, no formalities needed. The two maids explained that, for the Duke's honor, if Diana was too humble, it would only cause more trouble. In other words, she had to learn to carry herself properly, befitting her new status. Just then, the estate's head housekeeper appeared, greeting Diana politely and introducing herself as Annette Felcho, her presence both dignified and impeccably composed. Diana quickly returned the greeting, instantly recognizing her as Marchioness Felcho, and understood this woman was no simple figure. Diana silently judged that she seemed even stricter and more intimidating than in the original story. On reflex, she bowed a perfect 90 degrees, so polite it was almost excessive. But Annette immediately told her not to greet her first, and to greet the other person instead. She placed a hand on the shoulder of a black-haired boy standing nearby. Diana looked up and froze instantly. Standing before her was a boy with a presence unlike anyone ordinary. That boy was young Master Raquel, so handsome that even Diana had to admit it inwardly. In the original story, he was Nina's fiancé. Though she wanted to keep admiring him, Diana reminded herself she had no time to get lost in his looks. In the original story, Raquel had lived his entire life single. Diana's sudden appearance was bound to confuse Raquel. For her, everything had already begun drifting away from the original story in ways no one could have predicted. Diana gathered every ounce of courage to stand before the young Lord Raquel, trying to look dignified even though her tiny frame made the whole scene both tense and comical. She even raised her hand in an overly forceful military salute, nearly tousling her own hair, as though desperate to prove how prepared she was. Diana announced herself loudly, formally declaring her presence before the young lord. But the commanding air she tried to project only left Raquel staring at her in confusion. Raquel was so stunned he could barely say a word, clearly unable to understand why a little girl would suddenly act like a fresh recruit reporting for duty. Diana realized she had overdone it, but since it was already too late to back out, she pressed on, saying in a shaky voice that she would serve Raquel with everything she had, though inside she just wanted to disappear from embarrassment. A servant reminded Raquel that he should return Diana's greeting, while the girl stood there with her head bowed, enduring it, having no choice but to follow through with what she'd started. Another maid sighed, assuming Raquel was simply shy since this was his first time meeting Diana, then politely asked if she had seen her room yet, and told her to let the staff know if she needed anything. Diana grew even more embarrassed, stammering to keep up appearances while wanting nothing more than to vanish on the spot. She bowed deeply in apology, while the maids mentioned that a meal had already been prepared and would be brought to her room. Once everyone left, Diana finally exhaled in relief, thankful that the awkward greeting had finally come to an end. Standing by the window, Diana felt some relief after her first meeting with Raquel, though her mind was still a tangled mess from how sudden everything had been. She thought it was hard to believe she would actually become Raquel's wife, especially when he was still just a cold, distant child. Still, Diana reassured herself that at least Raquel hadn't thrown her out on the spot, and that alone counted as good fortune. She told herself not to worry. She was a proud soldier at heart, and she would find a way to survive here on her own. When the meal was served, Diana ate so heartily that even the servants were surprised, since it was rare for any noble young lady to eat with such an appetite. After eating, Diana fell asleep right in her chair, still clutching the tablecloth as though she had just come through a real battle. The maids gossiped that Diana was the adopted daughter of Count Mares, but even as an adopted child, she had been personally acknowledged by the Duke himself, so no one dared to take her lightly. In truth, Diana knew perfectly well that the loss of her powers was only temporary, not permanent. But back when she was 16, blinded by love and foolishness, she had secretly fled the temple after losing her manhwa. She never realized that the hand Crown Prince Mateo had once extended to her was, in fact, the very path that led straight to her death. In the present, the sound of someone calling "young lady" pulled Diana out of her dark thoughts, making her flinch and look up. The maids cheerfully asked which jewelry she'd like to choose, adding that if she had a specific design in mind, they would prepare it for her. Diana simply answered that anything would do, leaving the maid puzzled by such a casual response. Hardly what one would expect from a young lady unused to simple living. Then Diana suddenly remembered something more important, her eyes lighting up as if she'd just thought of something urgent to ask. She asked the maid if there was anything like a hair tie, since what she really needed right now wasn't fancy jewelry, but something practical. Afterward, Diana went outside to run, telling herself that building stamina meant first training this frail, twig-thin body of hers. But after running just a short stretch, she was already gasping for air, so exhausted that the maid following behind wondered what on earth she was doing. Diana refused to give up, telling herself she had to toughen up and keep training, because if she couldn't marry Raquel, she would become a knight of the duchy instead. She knew the northern lands of the duchy were brutally harsh, full of monsters and bitter cold, and that surviving there meant she had no choice but to train herself. Yet just 3 minutes later, Diana collapsed from exhaustion, panting heavily, realizing the distance she'd run hadn't even reached 5 meters. Clinging to a tree trunk, she muttered that this was all the fault of those fantasy romance novels forcing her to use some kind of reader's privilege as an excuse. Look where that got her. Just then, someone asked what she was doing there, making Diana look up in surprise. The one who appeared was Rael, his expression cold and far more composed than his age suggested, making Diana freeze for a moment. Flustered, she addressed him as "young lord," clearly not expecting to run into him looking so pathetic. Rael calmly told her she didn't need to fix her hair, saying it looked fine as it was. Diana felt awkward at the remark, while her attention drifted toward a strange bluish glow flickering faintly near Rael. Rael added that since they were practically strangers, Diana didn't need to worry about what he thought of her, leaving her bewildered by how blunt he was. Diana forced a smile, reminding him that the two of them were about to get married, but Raquel immediately steered the conversation toward the engagement itself. He coldly told her to call off the engagement and to go tell her father herself that she intended to break it off. Diana stood frozen beneath the flowering branches, unsure how to respond to such a blunt, blade-sharp rejection. Trembling, she asked him to repeat what he'd just said, still keeping her manners by addressing him as young lord. Without hesitation, Raquel repeated it. Call off the engagement. He went on, insisting Diana tell her father herself that she wanted to break the engagement, as if the matter wasn't even worth discussing further. Diana stared at him in silence, her expression slowly hardening, unable to simply accept such an unreasonable demand. She refused politely but firmly, using the excuse that she had recently been through too much upheaval to return home right away, and asked for Raquel's understanding. Raquel coldly replied that it had nothing to do with him, then told her to stop talking and just call off the engagement. Diana immediately protested, screaming inside that calling off this engagement was simply not in her vocabulary. Puzzled, Raquel asked what she meant by vocabulary, making Diana realize with a start that she had let slip an odd thought from her mind. The reason Raquel was so set on staying single traced back to his family's tragic history, especially the storyline where the male lead, Chris, came to the duchy to bring his mother and her side of the family back home. Raquel's tragedy began the moment he lost both his parents and his younger sibling, and that shadow over his family was exactly what had made him close his heart off so completely. That same person was also the one who had placed Diana's gravestone in that cemetery, and the gloom hanging over it only made her feel more keenly how cruel her fate truly was. Diana understood that his pity for her was genuine, but what frightened her more was the possibility that her own future might end just as tragically. Even though he treated her coldly for now, Diana told herself she had to endure it, believing that behind his icy exterior there probably wasn't pure malice. He coldly told her that if she refused to call off the engagement, she would have to catch a snake and a wolf herself. Diana reacted fiercely, insisting she could absolutely do it, the kind of stubbornness that made people feel sorry for her and want to laugh at the same time. Diana went on boldly declaring that a snake and a wolf were nothing. She could even catch a tiger, clearly putting on a brave face to hold on to her only chance at survival. When she returned to the estate, the maid saw Diana's disheveled state and worriedly asked why her hair looked so messy. Seeing Diana filthy from head to toe, the maid panicked and asked what on earth she had done. Diana quickly insisted she hadn't done anything terrible. Diana admitted she had only wanted to catch a snake, but in the end couldn't even find an earthworm, proof that her determination far outweighed her actual ability. The maid wiped Diana's face and told her that bathing too was part of growing up. She reminded her that getting hurt would be painful, which made the girl obediently agree. The maid prepared Diana's bath and told her to wait there, adding that if she went back to her room looking like this, the Marquis would surely scold her. Diana told herself that in her old body, none of this would have mattered, but this 5-year-old frame lacked both strength and stamina, making everything far more difficult. Still, Diana refused to let herself give up, knowing that if she stopped now, all that awaited her was death. Just then, a black-haired boy suddenly popped out, startling Diana into asking who he was. Diana realized the child before her was Andy, the youngest of the two Ark's brothers. Andy suddenly remembered he was supposed to introduce himself first, and cheerfully announced that his name was Andy. He proudly declared he was 5 years old. Though his stammering pronunciation was so adorable, no one could bring themselves to correct him. Diana was instantly won over by Andy's cuteness, unable to stop thinking how adorable he was, and the same age as her, no less. Diana greeted Andy warmly and praised how cute he was. Andy responded just as sweetly, calling Diana pretty and calling her sister. Diana was surprised that a child like Andy could exist within this cold, prison-like Duke's castle. When Diana explained she wasn't his sister but his sister-in-law, Andy looked utterly confused, not understanding what sister-in-law meant, while she herself paused, realizing she'd need to explain further. Diana reminded herself that since she would eventually catch a snake, a wolf, and even a tiger, explaining what a sister-in-law was should be nothing in comparison. Diana explained simply that a sister-in-law was the wife of one's older brother, since she was going to marry his. Hearing the word marry, Andy's eyes went wide with astonishment, as if his whole world had just been introduced to a concept far too big to grasp. Confused, Andy asked what marry even meant, making Diana realize she now had to explain something even harder to understand. Just as Diana was struggling for words, the maid returned to announce the bath was ready and asked if the two of them had been together the whole time. Andy cheerfully corrected her, insisting Diana wasn't just the maid's young lady, but his sister-in-law. The maid, surprised, asked where Andy had learned such a word, while Diana quickly pulled her along to bathe, afraid the conversation would only get more tangled the longer it went on. After that, Andy stuck to Diana like a duckling following its mother, and the next morning began with an unusually lively greeting. The moment Andy saw Diana, his eyes lit up and he cheerfully called out, "Sister-in-law," acting as close to her as if they'd known each other for years, despite it being only one night. Diana asked Andy where he was headed, and he invited her for a walk, saying the weather was lovely that day. Diana declined, explaining she had to go train, which left Andy curious and surprised. Diana said seriously that she trained in order to grow stronger, and the moment Andy heard that, he got instantly excited. Andy eagerly asked to join in, declaring he too would grow strong enough to catch snakes and tigers, which made Diana start to wonder whether hunting such creatures was really the standard of strength around here. Diana told Andy to watch her do it first since he was still too weak for now. Andy obediently admitted he was weak, which was both funny and endearing to hear. Diana was happy to have finally found a child her own age in this lonely castle, but just as she tried to show off, she lost her balance and fell flat on the ground, telling herself it was only because her adult mind still wasn't used to this child's body. Worried, Andy asked if doing that would help him get stronger too, while Diana quickly stopped him from copying her, not wanting him to fall the same way. Diana decided to start with basic fitness, asking Andy if he wanted to try push-ups. Though he had no idea what that meant, he happily agreed. Watching Diana get down to exercise, Andy curiously asked if knights also grew strong by doing the same thing. Diana pointed toward the knights and said they were very strong and that they were the ones who protected everyone. Andy immediately copied Diana's movements and asked if he could become just as strong. Diana told him not yet, but that she would teach him something he could do instead. Andy eagerly asked what it was. Diana held up 2 fingers and told Andy that if he ever ran into a bad person, he should shout, "Condition 2." Then she switched to Condition 1, to be used if the bad person tried to hit him, and stressed that he needed to remember it exactly. Andy focused hard and repeated, "Condition 1, Condition 2, while Diana nodded in satisfaction, telling him to memorize it well. But Andy accidentally pronounced it as Meow-dition 1, making the knights on the wall burst out laughing, while Diana quickly corrected him. It wasn't meow, it was condition. After a long stretch of training, both Diana and Andy were so exhausted they sat panting heavily beneath a tree. The maid found the 2 children and sighed in relief that they were finally here, while Diana had already fallen fast asleep from exhaustion. One maid asked whether they should wake Diana, seeing how deeply she was sleeping. The other said to just let her sleep a little longer since it wasn't quite bedtime yet anyway, and that she could go straight to dinner once she woke up. At the mention of dinner, Diana stirred groggily awake, her mind fixed on nothing but food. She quietly told herself she was starving, and just the thought of dinner alone sounded wonderful. Half asleep, Diana heard the maid say she had adjusted quite well and just needed a little more rest. But inwardly she was still confused, unable to understand what they were talking about. The maids mentioned that the crown prince and a prince would soon be arriving, and that they needed to prepare right away so Diana could learn proper table manners. Still drowsy, Diana grew more confused the more she listened, not knowing who these people even were. The moment she heard guests were coming, Diana panicked, wondering if it could be Viscount Norfer, the man who haunted her in her original memories. Just imagining it was enough to make her break into a cold sweat. Diana stammered, trying to recall something, though she still wasn't sure. Pulled from her half-dream state, her mind began piecing together frightening fragments of information. A maid calmly corrected her, explaining that the guests were His Highness the Crown Prince and a prince. Hearing this, Diana froze completely, the shock even greater than what she'd feared before. Diana let out a startled scream, making both maids jump as well. The once calm mood instantly dissolved into chaos, catching everyone completely off guard. Diana asked again in disbelief whether it was really the Crown Prince and a prince. The maid gently reminded her she'd just woken up and wasn't fully alert yet, then confirmed they would be arriving in a few days. The maid explained that the royal family had sent an invitation to Diana, but had decided to visit in person before she could even respond. This unusual approach only made the whole matter feel more suspicious. Diana knew the emperor wanted the 3 children to meet, and there had even been recent signs pushing the matter forward. She immediately sensed danger, since in the original story, the prince was the very villain who had manipulated Diana. The memory of that tragic ending flooded back. Diana recalled that saying she'd died because of him wouldn't even be an exaggeration. That alone was enough to make her realize she was standing right at the edge of a massive trap. Diana silently groaned upon realizing the Duke's castle sat right beside the lion's den. She had barely escaped one danger, only to find another looming right in front of her. The maid tried to reassure Diana that she needn't worry, since the royal family was very kind to children. But given everything Diana knew, that comfort sounded no different than whistling in the dark before a storm. Diana wondered if she could truly survive this. The fear from her old memories made her understand that a single misstep here could cost her dearly. On the day of preparation, Diana was dressed neatly. The maid reported that everything was ready, and though she looked composed and pretty on the outside, inside she felt anything but calm. The maid noticed Diana seemed tense. The girl immediately denied being nervous at all, though her expression betrayed her completely. The maid laughed and told Diana not to worry. Even if she made a small mistake in etiquette, she wouldn't be scolded for it. It sounded reassuring, but clearly the girl still couldn't relax. The maid teased that if anything went wrong, they'd be the ones punished in Diana's place. The joke only made the girl more anxious, and she quickly promised to be careful. The maid clarified she was only teasing, since today's gathering had actually been arranged specifically for Diana. Diana blinked in surprise, unable to understand why everything seemed to revolve around her. The maid revealed that the Duke had even prepared a gift for Diana. The girl was surprised. A gift under these circumstances felt both exciting and suspicious. The maid didn't know what it was, but guessed the Duke had put a great deal of thought into it, so Diana could look forward to it, even though she herself wasn't sure whether to feel happy or worried. Diana clutched the gift box, softly repeating the words, "a gift," with a puzzled look. Her mind spun, unable to guess what it could possibly mean. Diana thought of the cold, sharp-edged Duke, always carrying himself with such an unapproachable air. She wondered what on earth a man like that would give as a gift. Unable to figure it out, Diana could only stare at the box with a knot in her stomach. The more mysterious the gift, the more uneasy she felt. The Duke called Diana's name directly, then said coldly that today would be the last day she would ever be called by that name. The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere grew heavy. Diana clutched the box tightly, so shocked she blurted out a question. She couldn't believe a gift could possibly mean erasing her old name. Panic surged through Diana's mind. She feared this gift was actually a way of casting her aside. She trembled, certain everything was heading toward the worst possible outcome. Diana even thought she was about to be abandoned, but when she opened the box, she found a piece of paper inside that made her pause. Before her fear could fully settle, curiosity crept in. The Duke ordered Diana to open it. Despite her nerves, she did as told, while he calmly watched her reaction. Diana stared at the paper in bewilderment, wondering what it could be, a summons, or perhaps some kind of death certificate. She admitted her thoughts had run far too wild, though given the circumstances, it was hard to blame her. Looking more closely, Diana suddenly realized things weren't quite what she had imagined. She hesitated, beginning to sense this wasn't a disaster after all. On the paper was written clearly the name Rudia. Diana read it aloud slowly, as if the name felt both unfamiliar and strangely weighty. The Duke explained that this was her new identity, the adopted daughter of a vassal under him, Count Mares, with the name Rudia Mares. Diana understood she was no longer simply Diana. The Duke explained that to avoid complications during her brother's upcoming wedding, he had decided she needed a new identity and a new name. The reasoning sounded cold, but it was, in fact, a rather practical way to protect her. He added that the status of a betrothed could not serve as her official title. Through his words, Diana realized her position was being rearranged into something more legitimate. The Duke told Diana not to misunderstand. She would still continue living here. The new name wasn't meant to push her away, but to shield her from outside trouble. The Duke said that after the meal, he would announce this to the entire territory, so Diana needed to get used to her new name starting now. From that moment on, her life would officially take a different path. Diana stared at the paper, her expression falling silent. She couldn't find the words because this gift wasn't a piece of jewelry or a toy. It was a different chance at life. Seeing Diana's silence, the Duke asked if she disliked the name. She quickly denied it, claiming something had just flown into her eye, though anyone could tell she was moved. Diana realized her name was changing and from Diana to Rudia. This new name wasn't just a title, it also marked her separation from her old fate. Rudia understood her destiny was changing too, and that realization brought such relief that she burst into tears. After all that fear, she finally had a reason to believe she could live a different life. The Duke reminded her that tomorrow when his father, the Grand Duke, returned, Rudia would need to introduce herself under her new identity. The mention of tomorrow and the Grand Duke made her freeze on the spot. Rudia anxiously wondered who exactly would be arriving tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Duke calmly let his little brother keep eating, and the boy obediently continued, making the scene both tense and comical at once. The maid explained to Rudia that, to be precise, the person coming was the Grand Duke, the Duke's father, and he would attend the family gathering tomorrow. Rudia went completely still, realizing that above this already cold Duke stood an even more formidable Grand Duke. Rudia recalled her first meeting with the Duke, the bone-chilling coldness, and how he was the one who had taken her into this household. Now, thinking about his father, she had no idea what kind of terrifying person she was about to face. The Duke asked the servants to clear the table, and they were surprised, since he had barely eaten anything. The atmosphere turned solemn, as if even he had something weighing on his mind. Just as Rudia had begun to feel relieved, another worry immediately gripped her. Still, she told herself she couldn't let it break her, since she was now truly a young lady of the north. The next day, a magic gate opened before the castle, signaling the arrival of someone important. Rudia braced herself to face this new trial under her identity as Rudia. The maids whispered that the Grand Duke had traveled through the portal himself the day before, adding that it had been a long time since he'd appeared under the sunlight. Such gossip only made his arrival feel all the more significant. Rudia grew even more tense hearing he was on his way. As the procession entered, the maids bowed respectfully, while she braced herself to face the figure everyone seemed to dread. The Grand Duke appeared before Rudia and greeted her good morning with commanding presence. Flustered, Rudia replied as calmly as she could, though inside she was certainly a bundle of nerves. Seeing the Grand Duke up close, Rudia immediately noticed he looked even more haggard than he had at dinner the night before, his complexion weary, as if he hadn't been eating properly, something she couldn't help but notice. Rudia also saw that her fiancé kept avoiding her gaze, while the boy walking beside him was surely Jake, the Grand Duke's second son. Jake clung tightly to his older brother, deliberately ignoring Rudia, which annoyed her enough to silently scold the boy for copying his cold older brother so precisely. The teleportation gate was ready, and the one who stepped out to greet them was the Grand Duke, the true power behind this estate. The Grand Duke arrived with commanding presence, calmly welcoming Rudia with a stern expression that instantly chilled the atmosphere. The Grand Duke's gaze on Rudia felt even colder than before, leaving her so tense she thought she might freeze on the spot from that look alone. Flustered, Rudia greeted the Grand Duke, introducing herself with proper manners, though she was trembling so much that her hands instinctively folded neatly in front of her stomach, making her look impossibly obedient. The Grand Duke said all the arrangements for her meeting had been completed, then led her along, and Rudia, cold and tense, could only follow obediently. When informed that the Marquis was still occupied with morning duties and would arrive later, the Grand Duke calmly accepted it, showing no surprise at all. Rudia stepped into the dining hall facing the silence between the Grand Duke and the children, and could only sit there not daring to make a sound. Rael announced he would go ahead to the banquet hall, while Rudia could take her time following, since she still hadn't had breakfast. Rael was assigned to escort Rudia, and though a little surprised, he accepted the task obediently, while Rudia remained puzzled, not yet understanding what was happening. During the meal, the Grand Duke complained that the staff drew their wages every week yet couldn't produce even one decent magical device. He grew increasingly irritated over the excessive strain on the mana core and the absurd cost of resources. Rudia looked at the lavishly set table with unease, since ever since becoming an adult, she had never even eaten this well. She was too shy to eat, and the other children sat just as quietly, making the meal feel as tense as a taut string. The Grand Duke, realizing they would end up discussing business through the whole meal, ordered the ledgers and lists to be brought so they could continue reviewing them. Rudia's stomach growled loudly, shattering the serious silence so completely that everyone froze, leaving the girl too embarrassed to know where to hide her face. Rudia laughed awkwardly to cover her embarrassment, murmuring that she must really be hungry, pitiful yet undeniably funny at the same time. The Grand Duke sighed and told everyone to go ahead and eat, since it would be a shame to waste all the food the chef had prepared. The Grand Duke specifically told Rudia to eat properly, and she quickly replied that she already was, though she still looked visibly timid. Rudia had expected to be scolded, but instead the Grand Duke seemed genuinely concerned about her eating. And she realized with some surprise that perhaps being frequently hungry was simply normal for a child. The Grand Duke remarked that she didn't always eat dinner on time, and when someone pointed out that wasn't really something that happened every day, Rudia agreed. Parents, it seemed, just tended to worry like that. Marquise Zav rushed in, clutching a stack of documents and apologizing for being late. Zav explained that urgent business had come up early that morning, delaying him, his manner flustered yet still deeply respectful. The Grand Duke didn't reprimand him, simply telling Zav to sit wherever he liked. Zav quickly thanked him and prepared to join the meeting. The Grand Duke asked if this was the newly assigned vassal, and Zav confirmed that they had been short-staffed, so this person had arrived just in time, like a true lifesaver. When Zav accidentally dropped an important piece of paper, a stranger picked it up and politely handed it back to him. Zav gratefully accepted it, relieved to have the important document back, thanking the man without noticing that Rudia had already begun watching him closely. Rudia looked up at the man before her, a strange feeling washing over her that made her freeze. Looking at his face and bearing, Rudia was instantly reminded of a forked snake's tongue, someone who was clearly not what he seemed. Rudia's memories suddenly surged back, making her realize this man was connected to something extremely dangerous. She recalled that the original story mentioned a snake man, someone who frequently visited the Grand Duke's estate to gather information. What was even more terrifying was that this snake man would later go on to kill Jake, Raquel's younger brother. His presence here was nothing short of an omen of disaster. When the man pointed out that Zave had dropped something, Rudia privately resolved to find out whether he really was the villain from the story. For the sake of the Grand Duke's household's peace and Raquel's future, Rudia told herself she couldn't ignore this danger. Rudia hurried off to find someone who could help her, and along the way a servant recognized her and called out. The servant, puzzled, asked why she had come all the way here, while Rudia, too anxious to explain properly, just wanted to rush straight in to see the Grand Duke. The servant explained that a meeting was underway inside, so she shouldn't barge in, and asked if she wanted something to drink while she waited. But Rudia insisted firmly that she had urgent business. Seeing the suspicious man already talking with the servants, Rudia grew even more alarmed, silently cursing that the snake had already managed to get close to them. Rudia urgently declared that she needed to see the Grand Duke right away, insisting she had something very important to tell him. The two servants exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to handle the girl's sudden demand. One worried the young lady might get scolded, while the other felt just as uneasy, caught in a genuinely difficult position. Frustrated, Rudia silently cursed them as useless and troublesome, but on the surface kept insisting she truly needed to see the Grand Duke. She pleaded earnestly, repeating that she truly needed to see the Grand Duke, her anxious yet pitiful expression making it hard for the adults to refuse. The two servants were quickly won over by her pleading manner, though they still hesitated, unsure whether interrupting the meeting was wise. In the end, they reassured themselves that a quick greeting couldn't hurt, and Rudia promised she would be fast and leave right away. Rudia was led inside. She announced that Lady Rudia was looking for the Grand Duke, and every eye in the room immediately turned toward her. Rudia found herself face to face with the suspicious man once more, and he looked back at her with such a dark, ominous gaze that the whole room seemed to fall under a shadow of danger. Despite her fear, Rudia gathered all her courage to look straight ahead, refusing to back down before the man she suspected to be the Snake Man. The Grand Duke said he had let Rudia in because the meeting was nearly over, then asked what she wanted to say, opening the crucial moment for her to warn him of the danger at hand. A subordinate stepped forward before the Grand Duke, respectfully reporting that there was a matter requiring his attention. The golden-haired girl curiously asked what it was, unaware that what was about to be revealed would leave even the adults stunned. Tense, the girl explained that the tongue of the knight accompanying Marquise Zave looked very strange, specifically forked in two. Young as she was, she spoke with absolute certainty, clearly no ordinary claim. The Grand Duke froze at her words, asking again as if he couldn't believe it. His expression turned grave as he warned her not to joke about something like that, because if it were true, it would be truly terrifying. The girl insisted it was the truth. That man was a knight named Gaddy. She added that she had rubbed her eyes and checked over and over again, certain she hadn't seen wrong. The Grand Duke fell silent for a moment, then said coldly that he understood the situation. He ordered the girl escorted back to her room, clearly beginning to treat this as a genuine threat. On the way out, a red-haired man asked the girl how the banquet had gone. She answered indifferently that she didn't know, her mind entirely occupied with reporting to the Grand Duke. The man praised her for being so brave, noting that just a few months ago she hadn't even dared to look the Grand Duke in the eye. The girl immediately declared boldly that she was very brave, and that no danger was too great for her to overcome. The moment wolves or snakes were mentioned, the girl's expression suddenly changed, a sense of danger sweeping over her, as if the words had accidentally brushed against something lurking in the dark. The air shifted at once, and the girl was swept away by some unnatural force, her face full of panic as everything around her spiraled into chaos too fast for anyone to react. A terrified cry of "young lady" rang out as the girl was dragged away, the person beside her lunging forward in desperation, but the distance had already been swallowed by darkness. A hand reached out, trying to grab the girl, but it was too late. She hung tiny and helpless in the pitch black, utterly alone, a sight enough to make anyone's heart stop. A mysterious voice spoke up, calling out to the girl and asking how she had learned his true identity. Gritting her teeth, she stared straight at him, refusing to bow her head despite her fear. The massive snake revealed its true form, asking coldly whether the girl had seen its tongue. Its forked tongue confirmed every suspicion she'd had. She truly had discovered something she wasn't meant to know. Trembling, the girl still refused to back down, insisting of course she had seen it. She cursed him outright as a wretched snake, small in size but clearly not lacking in courage. The snake burst out laughing, mocking the girl for daring to call him that. He seemed genuinely amused by her boldness, as if it had been a long time since he'd met a child willing to talk back to him. Growing angrier, the girl threatened to cut off his head and snap it in two. The snake growled, both irritated and astonished, unable to comprehend how such a fierce mouth could belong to a child. The snake noticed a very familiar scent on the girl and told her to stay still, promising to spare her life if she behaved, a line that made clear he wasn't simply out to kill. Refusing to back down, the girl taunted that he was about to be crushed by the Grand Duke, since after all this commotion, everyone would know the wretched snake had shown himself. Talking back in a situation like that truly took nerves of steel. The snake admitted that everyone would likely find out after this chaos, but he still looked at the girl with a dangerous glint in his eyes, as if that fact alone wasn't enough to frighten him. He asked the girl whether she wanted to come with him. She looked utterly bewildered, never expecting to receive such a bizarre invitation in the middle of being threatened. A cold voice rang out, demanding the child be released. That single command alone was enough to change the entire atmosphere, for someone with real power had finally arrived. The Grand Duke appeared, magic surging around him, calling the snake a monster. His fury was unmistakable, especially with the girl caught in the enemy's grasp. The massive snake coiled itself amid the encirclement as the knights rushed forward. The Grand Duke stood facing it, the standoff tense as a drawn bowstring. The snake lowered its head and told the girl to watch how the old man would act. She flinched, both afraid and confused as to why the snake remained so calm. The snake spoke directly to Grand Duke Arcus, warning that any further attack would harm the child. It ordered the knights to stand down, using the girl as a shield to force the Grand Duke back. The girl realized in horror that she had become a hostage, the creature using her to hold the Grand Duke at bay. She understood that if this continued, he might very well take her away for good. She believed the Grand Duke would surely protect her, but this enemy was unlike any he had faced before. The thought that he might lose while trying to save her sent a chill down her spine. She told herself things really had turned dire, the snake still hovering menacingly before her, while she remained trapped with no way to escape on her own. But then her true grit resurfaced. She remembered she had once been a proud Special Forces soldier who had already died once, and she wouldn't keep trembling before this monster. Her gaze sharpened as she told herself she wasn't afraid of a mere beast like him. Her panic slowly hardened into resolve. After all, someone who had already faced death once wasn't so easily broken. The girl shouted loudly for the Grand Duke, insisting she was fine and urging him to kill the snake at once, even as she remained caught in the heart of the danger. The Grand Duke faltered briefly at her words while the snake laughed, remarking that she truly was a strange child, reckless yet impossible to predict. The snake admitted he didn't understand why the girl intrigued him so much. He decided to make an exception just this once, wanting to let her escape together with him instead of killing her outright. Just as the snake prepared to flee, the Grand Duke unleashed his power to block its path, coldly asking where it thought it was going. He had no intention of letting that monster take the girl away. The strike landed true, and the snake let out a cry of pain. The Grand Duke's magic pierced straight through it, proving he was not a man easily threatened. The girl fell amid the chaos, dazed and unable to comprehend what had just happened. She was still shaken, but fortunately hadn't been dragged off by the snake. In that hazy, drifting moment, the girl recalled her past life. She had once been a captain in the Army's Special Forces, named Jong Jun-seo. After losing her father, Jong Jun-seo had lived alone with her mother. To escape poverty, she tested into the military academy and became a captain in the Army's Special Forces. But exactly 1 year after her commissioning ceremony, her mother passed away. That tragedy became the deepest wound of Jong Jun-seo's life. She hadn't been able to be by her mother's side in her final moments, and her mother's last words had only been a wish for her to slow down and find lasting happiness. Even now, it brought a lump to her throat. Sometimes the strongest people carry the deepest regrets. Perhaps that was why, even facing death, the girl felt no fear. The thought that occupied her most in that moment was simply this: if she saw her mother again, would her mother scold her? All the girl could think was that when she saw her mother again, she would surely be scolded. The thought was both sad and comforting, turning a life-or-death moment into a quiet ache of homesickness. The girl slowly sank into the light, memory and reality blurring together. Golden hair spread around her small face as her consciousness drifted away from the chaos of battle. In her daze, she recalled a memory of herself once begging someone to spare her life, insisting she had truly done nothing wrong, that even beheading wouldn't be punishment enough. The memory continued of that person forcing her to drink a potion meant to grant her a peaceful death. He had asked if she didn't want to suffer pain, words that sounded gentle but were, in truth, infuriatingly cruel. Right after, the dreaded potion arrived, dragging the old terror back with it. The question, "Isn't that right?" echoed like a sentence being passed, making the nightmare feel even more suffocating. The girl woke with a gasp, panicking, desperate not to die. The nightmare left her trembling, a clear sign that her old memories still haunted her fiercely. The maids rejoiced at seeing her wake, quickly asking if she was all right, while the girl, still dazed, could only mumble, asking where she was. The maid reassured her this was her own room, and that everyone had been worried since she'd slept through an entire day. Lying in bed, she still hadn't fully recovered from the shock. Hearing that Grand Duke Arquis had personally saved her and that she was now safe, the girl slowly understood she had escaped the snake's grasp. At least this time, the Grand Duke had truly pulled her back from the very edge. Still shaken upon waking, the golden-haired girl found Casey overjoyed that her young lady had finally opened her eyes. Flustered, the girl replied that she couldn't have simply stayed quiet, clearly still quite confused. At the mention of the Grand Duke, the girl startled instantly. Casey explained that when the snake attacked, it was he himself who had personally saved her, leaving the girl even more bewildered. She suddenly remembered the snake and asked anxiously what had become of it. Even fresh from disaster, the creature was still the first thing on her mind, anxious yet undeniably curious. Casey said the snake was surely dead, since the Grand Duke had been so furious he'd nearly cut it clean in half. Hearing this, the girl trembled even more, thinking she absolutely had to win over this frightening man. Casey was told to stop chattering, since she needed to inform the Grand Duke that the young lady had awakened, and also remembered she needed to bring the girl her meal before hurrying off. Casey smiled brightly, saying the Grand Duke would surely be delighted to hear she had woken up. She mentioned how worried he had been, even pressuring the physician, which left the girl even more confused hearing it. The girl quietly thought of that cold, intimidating man. Even having been saved by him, she still couldn't quite imagine that he truly cared about her. Just then, the door creaked open, and someone outside told her not to move and to keep resting. Surprised, she looked up, not expecting a visitor to arrive so soon. The one who appeared was young Master Raquel, wearing his familiar cold expression, his presence instantly settling the air, while the girl was completely caught off guard. Sitting up in bed, she stammered a greeting, calling him young master. Raquel simply gave a short reply, his manner as composed as if visiting her were the most ordinary thing in the world. Hesitantly, she asked why Raquel had come, and he calmly countered by asking if she always made such a fuss whenever someone came to see her. Blushing, she argued back that she wasn't making a fuss. She just hadn't expected him to show up. Deep down, she was still worried they hadn't caught the snake, which only made her more uneasy. Raquel looked at her with a hint of irritation while she sat across from him, flustered. The mood between the two children was clearly awkward, though not exactly unfriendly either. Raquel said flatly that he hadn't come for that reason, then bluntly called her a fool, a short remark, but sharp enough to wound her pride. She flared up instantly, snapping that she wasn't a fool and demanding he take it back. She was so annoyed she even threw a pillow at him, quite the fighting spirit for someone who had just woken up. Raquel dodged calmly, then said she looked completely fine. He mentioned that Andy had been worried about her and told her to pass along the message that she was healthy enough to be downright annoying about it. Clutching the pillow, she watched Raquel leave in silence, and though still upset, she realized he had only come to check on her, an awkward roundabout way of showing he cared, very much in Raquel's style. As she picked up the pillow, something small and strange fell out from inside. A cord with a charm attached instantly caught her attention. She picked it up to look closer, surprised to realize it resembled a talisman, unable to understand why such a thing had ended up inside her pillow. She wondered if this was Raquel's roundabout way of telling her not to go after the wolf instead of the snake. The thought was almost funny, but knowing Raquel, she supposed it wasn't entirely out of the question. The girl called out toward the door to ask about it. From outside, the Grand Duke's voice answered at once, proving he had been waiting just beyond the door. The Grand Duke stepped inside, his manner stern yet unmistakably concerned. He asked how her body was feeling, health clearly his first priority. She quickly said she had slept very well, that she was completely fine, and thanked the Grand Duke for helping her. He reassured her, saying what had happened the day before had truly been dangerous, so she didn't need to force herself to appear strong. The Grand Duke asked where she had found such courage, noting that even adults could faint at the sight of a snake in beast form. Hearing that, she realized just how reckless her own actions had been. She explained that she had once trained with a special unit, then immediately felt a pang of worry that he wouldn't believe her. The harder she tried to explain, the more it sounded like she was making it up, both pitiable and amusing to watch. She kept rambling on about striking once, twice, 3 times to the head, then moving with the wind and attacking swiftly. The Grand Duke, listening, only found her fear expressed in the strangest way imaginable. After a while, she calmed down and said the Grand Duke must have been frightened too, yet had still come just to explain things to her. She realized the man before her genuinely, seriously cared about her. The Grand Duke blamed himself, saying he no longer had the face to see Count Mares. He told her that if she wasn't feeling well, she could go home and rest, but she immediately objected. She insisted clearly that she loved it here. The food was delicious and everyone was kind. Her heartfelt answer left the Grand Duke momentarily at a loss for words. She even declared she wanted to become the daughter-in-law of the Grand Duke's family. It sounded childish, of course, but the seriousness in her tone was enough to leave the adults speechless. Growing more animated, she declared she would catch snakes, wolves, and even bears if she had to. She swore to protect the peace of this place until the Grand Duke's hair turned white. Not stopping there, she vowed she would return to her old body one day and bring him a snake's head as proof next time. Her words were so fierce that the Grand Duke could only silently call her name in helpless exasperation. The Grand Duke and the maids all burst out laughing at her overly dramatic declaration. She, for her part, was left confused, unable to see what had been so funny. Embarrassed, she lowered her voice and said she understood, promising to rest properly. The Grand Duke indulged her, telling her to recover quickly and that he would go on ahead. Before leaving, the Grand Duke cleared his throat and reminded her she no longer needed to speak so fiercely. He also told her not to leave the bed, and to simply rest obediently. Sitting up in bed, she reluctantly agreed. Though she obeyed on the surface, her face still carried a pout at being scolded like a child. The Grand Duke left the room, leaving the maids behind. His footsteps faded into the distance, and the tension in the room eased considerably. Once the Grand Duke was gone, she pouted and asked why everyone had laughed at what she'd said earlier. She genuinely didn't see anything funny about it. To her, she had simply been very serious. Casey gently explained that they hadn't laughed because it was funny, but because she was simply too admirable, too adorable, and too worthy of praise. Hearing this, the girl blinked in surprise, clearly unused to such direct compliments. Casey added that even the Grand Duke hadn't laughed at all. He had only pressed his lips together tightly, as if holding back some emotion of his own. Casey went on, saying that in her opinion, even the Grand Duke might have. The sentence trailed off, leaving the listener even more curious, as if the Grand Duke's reaction had been something more than his usual cold exterior suggested. Elsewhere, the Grand Duke received a report that the search had just concluded and that the full report would arrive shortly, to which he simply replied calmly that he understood.